are going to continue with online meetings for the duration of the next year. In conversation, I've been informed that we are perfectly entitled to do that. There's nothing in the rules that says we have to meet face to face, and basically it's just for us to decide as a committee if we're going to continue with the virtual meetings or whether we're going to go back to face, and that's what this is really all about. So basically, I just want to invite comments on that. I may as well kick the issue off by just pointing out I've taken a bit of advice from various people about this. Obviously, the advice in general is that we minimise the amount of face-to-face meetings because obviously COVID is still a huge issue. We're hearing about variants all the time, and my personal opinion is that we should keep it as virtual for us as long as we feel it's a safe thing to do. I've also took a little bit of advice off members from last year's licensing committee who basically give me advice and said that the live stream and the virtual meetings actually worked quite well. In the report there was one or two minor issues, but overall it worked really well. And I just think that the overriding issue here should be the safety issue, and that would be where I would take it from. And I don't know if Dave and possibly even John could maybe back me up on this one, but if for some reason a particular meeting couldn't happen virtually, we should be able to, whether it would require another EGM, I don't know. But if it could only be done face to face, then that could be done. But I would be of the mind that we keep these virtual, just for the safety aspect of things. So could I just invite comments? I didn't see who went up first.
Chair, I think John Barton wants to come in. I think he probably wants to briefly go through the report.
I was going to go through the report, Chair, and deal with some of the issues that you've raised there. So Chair, as you're aware, this report concerns the proceedings of the committee and its subcommittees, who are both responsible for the discharge of the authority's licensing functions under the Licensing Act 2003. And in particular, as you've explained, the report concerns the need to determine if licensing hearings should continue to be held virtually or remotely, if you prefer, when considered appropriate. Now, I would refer you to the recommendations in the report, paragraph 2, where the committee has been asked to consider and determine whether the licensing hearings may continue to be held remotely, when considered appropriate to do so, up until April 2022, at which time the position will be reviewed by the committee, but there's no reason why you couldn't review that at an earlier date if you so wished. And if it is agreed in principle to continue with virtual hearings, then you've been asked to agree the procedure set out in Appendix 1 of the report. In terms of the background, Chair, this is a unique committee in the sense that the authority is required under the Licensing Act 2003 to establish this committee, and it has to have between 10 and 15 members. And as all licensing functions under the Act that can't be dealt with by officers, with a few exceptions, have to be dealt with by this committee or its subcommittees. The establishment and the proceedings of the committee and subcommittees are dealt with by the Licensing Act 2003 and not the Local Government Act 1972. And as members may be aware, the High Court recently declared that the emergency regulations brought in by the government, which enabled local authorities to hold virtual meetings because of the COVID-19 pandemic, couldn't be extended beyond the 7th of May 2021 without a change to the primary legislation, and there just wasn't the parliamentary time to do that. There was an issue for the court to determine as to whether or not a pretty historic act, the 1972 Act, was worded in such a way or was sufficiently worded to enable virtual hearings to take place, which is what the LGA and a number of local authorities were arguing. However, the High Court said that no, the 1972 Act is drafted in such a way that there's actually a requirement for physical attendance at a particular location. But, as I've already stated, that really relates to committees established under the 1972 Act and not to this licensing committee established under the Licensing Act 2003. And this committee has its own regulations. Those regulations govern how the committee and the subcommittees conduct its business. And although the regulations make reference to attendance or make reference to words such as attendance, appearance, leave and return, there's nothing actually in the regulations that prohibit, again, as you've indicated, Chair, that virtual hearings aren't possible where appropriate. If the committee do decide that there should be remote hearings moving forward, there may be occasions when obviously remote hearings can't take place, either because some of the parties just don't have good enough internet connections, they're simply unable to deal with the remote technology. And there also, Chair, may be equality issues to consider. So if an individual with a protected characteristic is unable to use electronic means of attending the hearing, as it were, then again, there may be a need to consider whether or not in those circumstances there needs to be a physical attendance at a hearing. So I think the idea of the meeting is to decide if remote hearings should proceed virtually. If you decide that they can, then I don't think it's a case of saying that all hearings will be conducted or should be conducted virtually. It's just giving you that ability to conduct remote hearings when you consider it appropriate. That may be the committee's default position or preferred option, if you like, but I don't think that you're constraining yourself and saying that all hearings must be held remotely. I think it just gives you that ability to decide almost on a case-by-case basis. In terms of the last year, speaking from a personal point of view, who's been involved in the hearings since I think May of last year when we had our first virtual hearing, the hearings have gone fairly well. There hasn't really been any technology issues. If there has been any issues, they've been overcome quite easily. I think one of the hearings we had lasted for 6 hours, and in that time there wasn't any technical issues. Everybody confirmed they had the opportunity to say everything that they wanted to say, and there was certainly full inclusion. And of course, just as this hearing, it's on YouTube, and you probably have more people actually viewing the hearing than would be the case if it was held in the Quadrant, where quite often you won't have any members of the public or members of the press in attendance. So, in summary, Chair, it's the committee's decision which way you wish to proceed with this. It's entirely a matter for yourselves. If you are going to go ahead remotely, then obviously you can review it as you consider it to be appropriate, whether it be April next year or sooner. But I think there needs to be that ability to have a decision to hold it physically or remotely, whichever is considered to be appropriate given the circumstances. Thank you, Chair. That's the report. If there's any questions that you may have, I'll try and answer them. But as you say, other than that, it's a matter for the members to discuss and come to a decision on. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, John. That's a much better explanation than what I came up with. Have we got any questions for John, or any comments anyone would like to raise? Can't see any hands up. Councillor David Drummond.
Thanks, Chair. Just to say that, I mean, in the interest of public safety, I think John and Dave did really well in the beginning to pull all this together along with the other staff. I've sat in quite a few licensing committee meetings, and we had a few gremlins at the beginning, which is understandable because we were just thrown in at the deep end, and everything seems to pan out really well online. It's more convenient. It's more convenient and safe for the general public than it is for everybody else. I mean, just look at one of the licensing objectives, public safety, and I think we should continue to do them online as long as we can, and it's safe to do so. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Davey. Councillor Kath Davis.
Thanks, Chair. It was just I just was going to ask about the occasion when there would have to be. I mean, I'm in agreement with the virtual. You know, I've been on the licensing committees as well, and I think I was on the 6-hour one with. I think Dave was on that as well. But we have learned from that process. But I just wondered, you know, that in the instance when they can't have a virtual, is that going to be where there's maybe technical problems for the the applicant or a disability issue or something like that?
Yes, it would, councillor. As I say, it may be that the general rule is that there would be remote hearings if that's the way that you want to go. But as you say, because of disability issues or technical issues, if it isn't possible to have a virtual hearing, then I think there has to be the option to have a face-to-face hearing, a physical hearing, if you like, so that you can actually perform the duty of determining an application. But I was in the chamber for the first time today at a committee hearing, so it was the first time I had seen the setup and the screens and the sanitizer and the distance between desks, etc. It's obviously been risk assessed. It seemed, in my humble opinion, to be COVID compliant. So obviously, if there is a physical hearing, there's a duty on the authority, obviously, to ensure that people attending are able to do so safely in a COVID compliant fashion.
Thanks for that. Thank you.
Right, okay. Councillor Linda Dork.
Hi, I would just like to say I did the last planning committee for last year about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we had it actually in the council chamber, and it worked quite well. My worry is if the virtual meetings and you've only got 3 members and if somebody's link breaks down and can't be restored, what happens then? You have to abandon the licensing subcommittee, and I worry about that.
My understanding is that if there is to be a virtual hearing, the hearing will be virtual. There won't be any hybrid hearings, as it were. So there won't be 3 members, say, sat in the quadrant and other individuals online. I think it either has to be all or nothing in the sense that it's either everybody's in the same location or everybody is online. And there's always that possibility of a breakdown in communication, as it were. But as you know, when we have had the virtual hearings, touch wood, yeah, but there's always that issue, isn't there?
Yeah, and then what happens then, or if the link breaks down and it can't be restored, it means you have to abandon it and then reassess?
Well, yes, I mean, obviously that was an issue when we first started these as to what we would do. And I think we had built into the process that Dave developed was that obviously we would call a halt to the meeting. We would have 5 minutes or so trying to see if we could overcome the problem. If necessary, stand the hearing down and recommence it as soon as we could. And in the year or so that we've been doing this, that hasn't happened on any occasion. I've said it now, but it didn't necessitate anything along those lines. But Dave will obviously confirm that there is a process with which he would follow if there was a communication breakdown. That's right, isn't it, Dave?
That's correct, yeah. The procedures in place in case something like that does happen. And as John said earlier, basically we keep trying until we get the connection restored. If it's impossible to reconnect, then the committee can decide whether or not they can continue without the person involved. Obviously, if it's an elected member, they can't, and then we need to adjourn and reconvene at another time, be that an hour later, once the connections are restored, or alternatively on an alternative date.
Okay, thank you.
Chair.
Yes, is that Councillor John Hunter there?
It is. Chair, I was at the meeting today, virtual meeting, and with John Barton was there, and there wasn't a problem. These virtual meetings, I think, are making hard work of it. It's nothing better than a face-to-face meeting, and the council chamber was well set out, and I thought it worked very well at the meeting today.
Just to clarify, though, that the meeting today wasn't a virtual meeting. People were in attendance. That's right, isn't it, Councillor Hunter? We were physically in the room. It wasn't a virtual hearing.
No, sorry, that's the way it should be for my money. Yeah. It's different. Everything's now. I don't think we'll ever get any safer than what we are now. was held in the thing. We've had a council meeting. We've been face to face, not a problem. I think we're making heavy weather of it.
Okay then, so any more comments, any other questions for John or Dave on any of the technical aspects of anything?
Chair, if there are no questions, I have some comments from members who can't be at this meeting. If you're happy for me to read them out.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
First one's Councillor Richardson, who thinks it makes good sense to keep the meetings virtual for now, as he understands it worked well last year. And he also thought about the possibility and the practicality of switching back to face-to-face meetings at some stage, if the circumstances allow. And that could be, I suppose, you have another meeting in September. If you wanted to bring something back partway through the year, then that would be possible. Councillor O'Shea thinks the full committee meeting should be held virtually, and the smaller subcommittees and panels held face-to-face. He thinks that the hearings require interactive conversations with attendees, which is more difficult when the meetings are held virtually. And Councillor Mulvenner has said he's happy for full committee to be virtual, and he prefers subcommittees to be face-to-face. And that's the comments I've received, Chair. But obviously the only people who can make a decision are the people who are here.
Okay, I've got Councillor Kath Davis. Would you like to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I couldn't press the button in time before for make a comment, but I do think the virtual meetings are more inclusive. I know it's been because of this pandemic, and hopefully, one day it will be safe enough for us to just be in a meeting without, without all the precautions and everything. But what I've found with the virtual meetings is it is inclusive for people who've got caring responsibilities. Members who maybe have got children or are having to look after elderly relatives or disabled members. And, I think that's the benefits of it. I mean, I do agree with the other meetings if we have to as well. But I do think it has worked well for the licensing and through the year. And I've found the meetings have been really, really well conducted. Thanks.
Thanks, Kath. Councillor Linda Dog, you've got your hand up again.
Yeah, I'd just like to say I'm in agreement with Councillor Hunter and Councillor O'Shea. I think, have face-to-face meetings. Surely a small number of people that could be held in the council chamber. On planning committee, you've got 9 or 11 members of plan committee. You've got various officers and that, and it worked fine. My opinion, anyway.
Yeah. Councillor Davy Drummond.
Thanks, Chair. I take on board what Councillor Dahl and Councillor Hunter are saying. But for now, I think we should remain with the virtual meetings. I mean, to be honest with you, for working councillors like yourself, it's a lot more convenient to do them online because you can do them from anywhere. You don't have to rush around and try and get to the quadrant to perform them. But I mean, further down the line, we'll end up going back to that and we'll get around it. But I just think for now we should just remain and then review it later on in the year.
Thank you, Davy. Councillor Kath Davis, is your hand back up, or is that a legacy hand?
It's a legacy hand, sorry, Chair.
No problem. Councillor Gary Madden.
Thanks, Chair. I think anything that reduces any kind of risk is a good idea, to be honest. A lot of the meetings we've been kind of forced to go back into because of government legislation, various other things. And, it's already been raised there about people at work, and not everyone's retired. I'd love to be. And it does make life slightly easier for us. And it means the general public can get involved a bit more as well because it's streamed. So I'm in favour of it. And no one's saying, that we're not going to have proper meetings at some point. We're just keeping all our options open. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Have we got anyone else would like to make a comment or Any questions for any of the officers? Right, Dave, could I just check with you exactly what the procedure needs to be now? Obviously we've got different views on this, so could you advise as to what the procedure needs to be?
Chair, there just needs to be, I suppose, a vote on one of the options. And at the moment, the recommendations are consider whether remote hearings should be continued when it's appropriate to do so. I suppose that's the recommendation at the moment, because nothing else has been put forward. So it's basically consider the recommendation in the report unless somebody wants to move an alternative recommendation.
Okay. Is there anyone who would like to move an alternative recommendation? So at the minute, my understanding, Dave, would be that we stick to the recommendation is that we stick to virtual where necessary and possible, but that isn't tying our hands if we need to go face to face at any given point.
That's the recommendation at the moment, Chair. Obviously, if that's,
I just want to be really clear about that. Yeah. So just to let the committee know, we're not. This vote doesn't actually say we'll have to do it for the entire year. But if we get to a point where, if we start with virtual, we'll get to a point where we need to go face to face, and we think it's more appropriate, we can do that. Yes.
Yes, Chair.
Thank you.
And sorry, Chair, I should have perhaps said as well during the presentation of the report, my understanding is that if there's a particular request, if you like, for a hearing to be held with physical attendance, because for whatever reason a virtual meeting isn't appropriate, it would be the chair of the committee who, hearing what that individual has to say and perhaps considering the views of the others, would then have the determination as to whether or not it was held virtually or physically, as it were, in a building.
Right. Okay.
Chair,
Any other comments?
I can see Gary Madden's hands up. I don't know if he wants to come back in, Chair.
Yeah, Gary, would you like to come back in?
I've left the hand up.
No problem. No problem. Right. Thanks for that, Gary. Right. Okay, then. So the recommendation is that we're trying to stick virtual with obviously the option to move to face-to-face if and when necessary. Like I say, I've been listening to what people are saying. But what we've got to remember is from a safety point of view, and even though some meetings are going back face-to-face, I think as North Tyneside Council, we have been forced into those meetings going back face-to-face. I think if you think back to what we've been told of Bryn Roberts, they actually didn't want, and they went to the High Court and asked if they could continue with the virtual meetings because of safety issues. So as a council, I don't think we actually are wanting to go back face-to-face. I think we've been forced to do that. And I think Gary Madden raised that when he was talking about it. So, you know, I'm minded to keep on the safe side. So I'm just looking for, do we need a vote show of hands, Dave, or?
Chair, I think from what I'm picking up during the course of the meeting, I think it's probably better if I call the names out and that member indicates whether they're for the recommendation or against it. And the recommendation is we go for virtual meetings. Either for that or against it, and obviously there's the safeguards of the meetings can be face-to-face if necessary.
Okay, would you like to commence that list?
Thank you, Chair. So if I start with Councillor Bartoli.
For.
Councillor Davis.
For.
Councillor Dark.
Reluctantly for.
Councillor Drummond.
For.
Councillor Hunter.
Against.
Councillor Madden.
For.
And Councillor Phillips.
Happy for.
Right, Chair, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 for and 1 against.
Okay, so the recommendation is passed. Could I just put a little addendum in there? Obviously, as chair, if at any point, if any members of the committee have any issues or think that the virtual thing isn't working for whatever reason, please just get in touch. Obviously, with myself, with John or Dave, and we can discuss it. And if obviously we want to get things right and for the right reasons. So if it does appear to be going a little bit wrong, then just let's talk about it and we'll make the decision there and then. Okay, is that fair enough to say, Dave?
That's fine, Chair. Obviously, it's a decision of the committee if they wanted to change things permanently, and you have a meeting in September on another matter, which, if necessary, we could bring a report to the September meeting if there's concerns and people want it changing during the course of the year, Chair.
Excellent. Okay. Obviously, with it being a EGM, there's no additional any other business. Is that right, Dave?
There's never any other business on these meetings, Chair.
No problem. If that's the case, I'm quite happy to close the meeting unless anyone needs to say anything. Or everything okay?
Thanks.
Right. Well, thank you very much.
Cancel the live stream, Chair.